Let me bring in Colonel Jack Jacobs. Colonel, Israel has successfully targeted, not just in this case, but before Hezbollah leadership meetings and movements. Obviously, it says something about the robustness of their intelligence operation. Does that fact, do those capabilities give Hezbollah pause as it considers what it does in response?
It'll give them pause, but they are still going to have to respond in some way to keep faith with the faithful and to satisfy Iran, who doesn't want them to stop doing what they're doing. Israel's got a problem in that it's in the process of fighting a two-front war. Netanyahu in particular and the IDF have difficulty because they've committed themselves to destroying Hamas, and they're actively fighting down there. But if they've got to fight also Hezbollah and protect that border, it's going to be extremely difficult. They're going to have to call up more reserves. They had 350,000 reserves that they had stand down because it was deleterious to the economy to have all those people in uniform. They're going to have to call a bunch of them back. Trying to strategize holding Hezbollah at bay on the one hand, and also getting rid of Hamas and getting hostages back on the other. This is extremely difficult for the IDF and for Netanyahu to do, Chris.
Well, let's talk about the idea that we've heard. We heard it earlier from the defense secretary. We heard it at the State Department briefing. Obviously, the United States wants to do everything it can possibly do to de-escalate this situation, to work on this diplomatically. But Yoav Gallant, who, as you know, is Israel's defense minister, said Hezbollah had crossed a red line. How much will words be able to answer what happens, and how much of it will have to be action?
Well, there are always going to be responses, so Hezbollah is going to respond in some fashion. If it's perceived by the IDF to be proportional, there won't be any more, or there won't be any. There won't be an escalation of the type that we fear. But invariably, the perception is going to be that there's an escalation by one side or the other. The use of the diplomatic instrument, which the United States has been working, and its allies, been working very, very hard to employ, gets strained by the exchange of fire like this, and it makes it much more difficult to get people to sit down and agree to any kind of reduction in hostilities. Nevertheless, the fear that there might be a much wider war, and here we're talking about attacks on Iran, for example, or incursions on the ground by the IDF into Lebanon, which they've done before. The diplomatic discussions have been and will go a long way to alleviating the possibility that that would happen. Even so, just one wrong move by one side will escalate this thing very much out of control, Chris.
Jack, stay with us. I want to bring in MSNBC Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell. I know that you have been working the phones, Andrea. What are you hearing about the significance of this, and do we know the status of the Hezbollah commander who was targeted?
We're not sure of the status, and I think it is going to take a while. And just to point out that these things do take time. We talked to a senior Israeli official on Friday, for instance, about a previous hit involving a Hamas leader, which was a week old, and they were checking DNA. They still did not know for sure. They thought that they had him. That said, that's Mohammed Daif. But what we don't know is whether they actually got this commander, the Hezbollah commander, but they were hitting in the Beirut suburbs. This is very significant. They were hitting clearly not just a military target. So this is an escalation, but it's in retaliation, of course, against this hideous alleged Hezbollah strike, according to the U.S. and the Israelis, that only Hezbollah could have done this attack that killed 12 children on a soccer field on Saturday afternoon. And they said that they were going to retaliate. They had a national security meeting with the prime minister after he got back from Washington on Sunday. And they said that they were going to hit hard. And clearly what they did preliminarily, Chris, was not what we considered the robust response. So they were working on this. They had intelligence. And they may or may not have gotten this guy. He was the #2 commander in Hezbollah. who was supposedly in charge of this attack on Saturday. Now, we should point out that Hezbollah denied it, but nobody believed that denial. The U.S. said that they had a clear line that the rockets used were Hezbollah rockets. They were Iranian-produced Hezbollah rockets. And it was very clear that Israel was going to respond very strongly. In terms of what Jack, who knows this area so well, was talking about, the escalation that Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense in the Philippines, that Secretary Blinken on his Asia trip have all been calling for. Secretary Blinken talked to the Egyptian leader today. Everyone is trying to dial this down so that it doesn't become a second front. A second front is something that both Netanyahu and the Defense Minister Gallant have been talking about. And they've been under a lot of pressure to go after Hezbollah. 60,000 Israelis, Chris, have been evacuated from their homes since October 8th. They want to get back. There's a lot of pressure, hard right pressure, as well as pressure throughout the population to go after Hezbollah, do something about this northern front. And the constant rocket attacks, not all-out war, but rocket attacks coming and ordered from Iran, Hezbollah's sponsor. And Hezbollah is not just a terror group. Hezbollah is part of the Lebanese government. They're in the parliament. They're a part of the political process. They have territorial control over a good deal of Lebanon. The last time Israel and Lebanon were at war, Lebanon was almost totally destroyed. And it was at tremendous cost. But Israel at the time was not on a second front, also at Gaza, in Gaza. And that is what has been so troubling to the U.S., that if this thing does become a direct all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah, Iran will get into it. Israel may not be able to combat, which are reported to be 150,000 rockets in ammunitions that Hezbollah has. This is not Gaza. This is not leaders underground in tunnels. This is an armed military force that could go into combat against Israel, and everyone in northern Israel and beyond are completely vulnerable. So that's what American officials and others around the world have been trying overtime since Saturday to try to de-escalate, and in fact, since October 7th, to stop this from becoming a second front.